Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for the webinar on buying and selling a dental practice in today's world with Michael Dinsio with Next Level Consultants. My name is Sean McDonald, and this is officially my first general meeting with the Alameda Dental Society. I began as their executive director on November 1st, and excited to have the opportunity to work with the society and all the members. I was looking through the registration list today, and I've had a chance to speak with a lot of you in person. A lot of you I obviously have not spoken with, and look forward to the day when we will finally be back in person for these general meetings and have the chance to meet all of you. So nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before I turn it over to Michael, just a quick announcement. The ACDSCE committee has just announced their first general meeting for the 2021 year. That will be a webinar on January 19th on orthodontics and periodontics in the aligner age with Dr. Frank Salenza. We did send out an email announcement about a week ago, but look for some more communications for the first meeting in 2021. So that will be a webinar on Tuesday, January 19th. And as I introduce Michael here, we do have a quick poll for everyone. So I'm going to launch this poll. If you can please respond while I introduce Michael here. So Michael is an experienced dental practice consultant who has helped over 500 doctors start, buy, and grow their practices for almost a decade. Prior to founding Next Level Consultants, Michael spent 6 years representing one of the nation's largest financial institutions in a territory stretching from Alaska to Colorado. In that time, he guided more than 220 dental office startups and facilitated 200 practice transitions. Today, Next Level Consultants is a premier practice management organization that helps doctors nationwide get into ownership and thrive beyond your average practice. Michael and his team of experts advise clients in all stages of their practice, whether it is establishing a new business, maintaining and/or expanding a practice, or preparing to sell. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. Thanks again, Michael, for joining us today. And before I do, Michael, can you see the results of the poll that was just sent out?
I cannot, but I'm excited to see them. Maybe share them in the chat, or maybe share them live. But thank you, first of all, for having me, Sean, and congratulations on your new role. That's a big deal. Sean and I were talking earlier this week, and you know, it's great to see some young blood in that chair, and I know that you have some big plans for the organization, and that's super cool. And then I also wanted to share my gratitude towards Dr. Jolie. She's so awesome. She visited me, I think, at an event that I talked at or spoke at a few maybe a year ago or so, before all this craziness with COVID, and that's how her and I got connected. And she put this whole thing on and reached out, and I'm just blessed to be a part of this this tonight. So thanks Sean and Jolie and everybody that was involved, truly. So I can see the results now, so that's good news. It looks like 23% I currently own a dental practice and seeking information about selling. Good. Then 38% I do not own a dental practice. I'm seeking information to purchase. So we've got 23% of the sellers and 38% of buyers. And then interested in the current market and buying and selling in general, it's another 38%. So kind of mixed, which is good. If those results, if you guys could just continue to vote, that'd be really helpful. You know, as Sean pretty much described, you know, I've had the opportunity and was blessed to help so many doctors across the country. I worked for Bank of America for a lot of years, and had the opportunity to meet a lot of great dentists and be a part of a lot of transitions and startups, and just loved every bit of it. But just got really exhausted in the banking world, and wanted and was craving a little bit more from my clients. You know, when you lend somebody money, you walk away from that relationship for the most part, unless, you know, online banking is messed up or something. But for the most part, they just, you know, sink or swim type of a thing. And I always wanted a little bit more. So I got into consulting and really carved a niche out in transitions, and then also built a part of my business for practice management as well, because I found that post transaction, there was a lot of fires that needed to be put out. And so I put a team together, a clinician and a front office guru, and the three of us really help our clients thrive post close. But tonight, it's all about the transition. And I want to spend half of tonight talking about buyers and the process that you'll go through, even especially in this world of COVID. And then the other half I want to spend on helping sellers really get ready for ownership and ownership, but the exit strategy. It's such a big event, and there's a lot of things to think about going into that. So we're going to break this up. 50% of it is going to be buying, and then 50% is going to be things to think about as sellers. I think both sides could get a lot out of it. Sellers could understand buyers. Buyers could understand sellers and where they're coming from. And then we're going to finish up with a bunch of QAs. And I got to be honest with you, these webinars are a little maddening because I'm sitting here staring at the screen, looking at my own face, and I really thrive off of the audience. And so please ask a ton of questions. I prepared about an hour's worth. I might go over slightly, but I really want to answer your questions because in transitions, they're so unique to the situation. I promise you, I've been in the business for a long time and touched a lot of deals, and there isn't much that I haven't seen, but every person's practice and every buyer and seller situation are completely different, which makes my job a lot of fun. Not every crown is the same on every patient, as you all know. So yeah, let's get into it. So buyers, you got the first half, and as Sean may have explained or not explained, there's a QA button down the bottom. I want to see questions pop in there as I'm talking, and we'll address those, and maybe I'll call them out during, but definitely use the webinar's functions down there in the Q&A, and then even you could throw in the chat as well. So, and I'll see those as well. So, okay, so buyers, buying with confidence. So I start every presentation lately with COVID as really talking about COVID and how this crisis has really stretched us in a way that we probably didn't realize we could be stretched. But when you're stretched, there's growth. And I know a lot of stress, but you navigate that and you usually come out on top. And the moment's really, it's a freak out moment. But then in the end, you're like, gosh, I navigated that. I nailed that. And so the Chinese symbol for crisis actually means both danger and opportunity. So isn't that true, right? Like when something's happening, there's an opportunity. And as entrepreneurs on this call, if you're on this call, you're an entrepreneur. And I will tell you right now, buying a practice, there's an opportunity to buy a practice in this environment. And there's also an opportunity to sell your practice and get out of it. And so either way you look at it, it can be an opportunity. And I just wanted to remind everybody, good job for getting through this nutty world that we live in. We survived it, and let's make some plans for the future. And so this is my agenda for you folks looking to buy a practice. Okay, so the 5 things that I really look at as a buyer's rep, a buyer's agent, or a buyer's advocate, whatever you want to call me, consultant. I look at a lot of things, but these are the most like impactful things that I think buyers consistently come to me with questions or concerns. And so let's go through this. So what is the real profit of the practice? It's really important to know, obviously. Tax returns hide a lot of things. We're going to get into that, but big picture, you can't buy a practice if you don't know how much money you will make post-close or what you're expected to make. Financing. I was a banker for so many years. It's not the same as it was 6 months ago. I can promise you that. That being said, they're still lending and there's still opportunity to absolutely get funded. They're just looking at deals a little bit differently. So we're going to touch on that. Should I buy accounts receivables? Number 3. So accounts receivables is a funny thing. I get a lot of questions of working capital. Should I get working capital from the bank, or should I buy the accounts receivables? Let's talk about that. Sellers, pay attention during that part. how fast can I get credentialing, or what's your insurance strategy? There's always a strategy around insurance. And if you're buying a practice that's heavy PPO or fee for service, and how quickly can you get credentialed, and should you negotiate your fees and all that good stuff. So there definitely needs to be a strategy there. And especially in California where you all are, and Delta Premier and all that nonsense with Delta. So that's definitely something we could discuss. And then lastly, how are you going to grow the practice? And this is really important to me when I'm looking at a transition. Sure, I can analyze it, and tell you exactly what you're buying, show you where all the opportunity is. But there always is going to be attrition, I promise. I was just talking to one of my clients that closed less than a month ago, and I said, how many charts have been put on your desk or maybe front office person isn't putting those charts on your desk, of people wanting to leave the practice in the last 4 weeks? And he said 4. And I said, that's nothing. That's awesome. For 4 weeks, you've only had 4 charts. That's going to happen. So I expect about 10 to 15% of attrition. And there's definitely some things that you can do, and sidebar, that you can slow that attrition rate. But the question is, how are you going to grow the practice to offset that loss? If you don't have a game plan for growth, you're going to be in a situation. So those are my 5 points, and I'm going to bust through this in 30 minutes. Might feel fast, but if I touch on something, please ask questions. Okay, so the profit. This is the first thing that everybody asks me is, how much is the practice making? So I want you to all to realize, buyers and sellers, you're probably going to be shaking your head. There's personal expenses baked into the business expenses. And those expenses are actually things that you would probably have to pay if you didn't own. But the government allows you to write things off, and there's a tax shelter there. The easiest ones that I could think about is, your car. You run your car payment through the company. So if you didn't do that, you would get paid a paycheck, and then outside of the company, you'd make your car payment anyways, right? And so the government allows you to reduce your income on paper and allows you to expense things through the business. And so it's this shell game that buyers really are frustrated with, when the practice brokers show the buyers what all the adjustments are, or what the add backs are, or what the real profit is. And you got to figure that out. Now, as a banker, I would calculate that number very conservatively. As a CPA, they're probably going to calculate that very conservatively. As a practice broker, it's going to be very aggressive. They're going to throw everything in there to show you, buyers, that it's very, very profitable. And so there's this healthy balance. You're not going to get one number from every person, and that's probably going to frustrate you. But I just want you to know, like, you could look at the conservative and you could look at the aggressive, but understanding what that range is really important. And you'll see that in the prospectuses is all the adjustments. So there's like the profit and loss, profit, net income. And then there's all the adjustments. And then the broker tells you, hey, this is really what they made. And so a lot of buyers, there's not much trust with the practice brokers a lot of times. And I guess that's why I'm a buyer's advocate. I can help you work through that. But there's things just those are personal expenses that you really need to work through. The other thing that I want you to notice is the expenses in specific areas. Are they too high or are they too low? If they're too low, that's a red flag. Why are they too low? What's going on there? Is he running things through a different entity, or what's not reflective here? When I take over, the expenses might be higher. And so you got to navigate that. But on the things that are too high, are those right? So wages is like one of those things, like, maybe my fiance or my wife works at the front office and we overpay her, or maybe she doesn't work at the front office, but we still pay her like she does. So we got to adjust that. Supplies, that's a big one. I see supplies at 10% sometimes. It really should be closer to 5 to 6%. So when you take it over, if you manage that, is that an opportunity to grow your bottom line? So you really got to look at this whole thing and decide what is the picture today and what is the picture going to look like when I buy, and understanding that. And the banks try to do that for you, but some of the banks are very conservative and some of them are very aggressive. And so that can be frustrating. So there's the practice and how much it makes. But then there's the you part. And I always talk about this because there's two parts to a transition. This practice could be amazing, but the buyer might not be qualified. Or vice versa, the buyer could be incredibly qualified, lots of cash, great credit score, but then the practice stinks. So it really does got to be a good fit. And how that gets determined is your situation personally. Okay. And so this is kind of like the simple formula here. So practice profit is the money that's coming in, and assuming you've gone through the exercise of understanding what that profit is, what we just talked about. Then there's the minus the personal expenses. That's your actual personal expenses. Then you got to take off the loan. The loan is not in the business expenses. The loan is actually a personal obligation. So practice profit, personal expenses, house, mortgage, cars, all that stuff. Then practice loan, you got to factor all that in, and then that's pretty much how much you're going to live off of. But there's always this what if factor. What if, or what else? And I always say, if there's a strategy going into a transition and you're trying to grow the practice, sometimes that means the practice wasn't spending money in marketing. So you got to invest in some marketing. So that's going to come off. Sometimes maybe keeping the seller on, which I don't really advise, but if the seller stays on, okay, that's going to change the profitability. So, subtract that off. There's really 100 scenarios there. But what I want you to understand is there's, you want to really figure out not only what the practice makes, but how much am I going to earn pre-tax or post-tax, if you want to get really granular, how much I'm going to make so that you can survive it, right? And then grow it from there, and factor in the attrition too. Okay, like that could have been an hour conversation right there, but we'll spare you from that. Financing. Okay, so financing is interesting these days with COVID. So, before COVID, you could have a pulse and be able to fog a mirror and they would give you money. I mean, money is super easy, but COVID happened and certain banks rebounded very quickly and some did not. And so some of these 7 things were always in play for the dental lenders. And I worked for them, one of the biggest. But now they're being extra sensitive to some of these, and I want to call those out for both seller and buyer. So we talked about the last slide, can you afford it? So that's the you part of that formula. The practice has profit, but can you afford it minus loan, minus personal expenses, minus the loan itself, the loan payment. So that's obviously the first calculation. But they have kind of increased. They used to be a little thinner on that ratio, but now they are they used to be a little bit more aggressive with that ratio. Now they've come down a little bit in that ratio. So it really has to cash flow really well. That's number 1. Number 2, are you a producer? A lot of people ask me questions about this. So buyers, there's got to be a game plan for how you're going to be able to handle the production that the practice is doing today. And what I mean by that is, can you handle the production? So, and that, by the way, that does not include hygiene. So let's say your practice is doing $1 million production, total collections, subtract out the hygiene production, which is typically 30%. So can you do 70% of the $1 million, 700? Can you justify it? Do you have practice analysis reports from your current associate position showing that you can do the production of the practice that you're looking to finance? So there's got to be a game plan there, and if there isn't, then they're going to beat you up there and maybe ask you to have the seller stay on, or maybe you have to get an associate to help you with that production, and then the cash flow is strained even more because now you're paying an associate and you. So there's got to be a game plan for production. Okay. How much cash and liquidity do you, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, have? And I would say this is the one thing single-handedly that has killed a lot of my deals over the last 8 months, and that is, does the buyer have enough money on hand, cash liquidity? So liquidity is characterized as anything that you can liquidate quickly without penalty. So 401ks do not count. This would be marketable securities, cash, I suppose cash value on insurance policies if you had that, but anything that you could liquidate without penalty and take it and use it towards a stressful situation. That's what the banks want to know, okay? So they're looking for 10% of what you're looking to finance, 10%. Unfortunately, that's a thing for sure. There's a few banks that don't care about liquidity, but they definitely want you to have some cash. Some of the bigger players in the marketplace are being very, very aggressive with that one. So you better have a rich uncle or someone that can gift you some money or something to, and that's allowed, by the way, to supplement what you might not have. Okay. Sean, I'm going to do my trick here. My water bottle is green, just like my green screen behind me. And so people are always looking at this thing like, what is going on? So that's what this is all about. So, all right. So is the practice overvalued is number 5. So what's that mean, overvalued? Overvalued means within the parameters of what they feel like it's worth. So I will tell you that most lenders are kind of capping things at like 85% of what the practice collected. And that includes working capital and accounts receivables. And we're going to get into that a little bit. So there's the purchase price plus working capital or the value of the accounts receivables, all baked in at about 85% is where they want you to be. Now, if it's over, sellers might have to do a carryback, and we can kind of get into that in the second part of this. But we got to figure out a way of how to work within the bank's limitations of 85%. Of course, there might be some deals every once in a while out there that are in the 95 percentile sellers, but big picture here, they definitely want to keep you, under that 85%. Okay. Number 4, big one. Has the practice rebounded from COVID? This is probably why a lot of you are on today. So COVID, with the practices that Next Level Consultants consults, our practices haven't seen a lot of half of our clients are in Washington. They're dispersed around the rest of the country. We even have a client in Alaska. So we're well represented here. But most of our clients have kind of rebounded and are doing really well and approaching the year end strong to where there's less than a 15% difference. And I will tell you that the banks don't want you to be less than 20% off of last year's numbers. So at least producing or collecting about 80% of what you did in 2019. There's been a real insurgence with a lot of patients coming into the practice while we were closed. And so we did get that rebound, and hygiene is an interesting conversation about that. But big picture, has the practice rebounded? Are you within about 80% of where the practice was in 2019? Okay. Next one. Oh, I see that I skipped that. Okay, so hopefully you guys are all tracking me. Last 2 things are obvious: non-compete and the lease. So of course there's got to be a good lease, and we can talk about that a little bit more, sellers, but we got to have a good lease where there's no weird demo clauses or the buyer has to be able to get into the practice for at least as long as the term of the loan. So if you're signing a 10-year loan, the buyer really needs to have about 10 years worth of a lease, because the worst case scenario there would be, let's say a buyer buys a practice, they get a big loan, $1 million loan, whatever it is, and then the lease gets terminated 5 years. Well, they're still holding a huge loan payment, right? And now they got to relocate somewhere else. So that's going to cost them a ton of money. And now it just doesn't make sense. They've got debt from the acquisition. They've got debt with the project. And so usually that doesn't work out. So we got to secure the lease for the buyer for at least 10 years so that the buyer has the ability to pay off all their debt before they're challenged with relocating again. So maybe we're going to get some questions about that. Of course, non-compete, that should be obvious to all you all. Got to be a non-compete with you. I can tell you the non-compete laws absolutely hold up when you sell an asset. So sellers, when you're selling this business, the law looks at it differently. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to claim to be a lawyer here. But when you sell something, the non-compete absolutely holds up. If you work for somebody, completely different scenario. When you're selling your company for $1 million and you get a check, you cannot compete against that person. So two different laws there, so don't get them confused. Okay, accounts receivables. This is a fun one. So accounts receivables versus working capital. So two different assets, accounts receivable versus buying the practice. The practice will be valued, and it's something that I help my clients with on an everyday basis of what the practice is worth. The broker helps the sellers on what that practice is worth. I help sellers too, but big picture here, there's the practice is its own asset. The accounts receivables is a completely different asset, okay? And usually baked into the same loan, but I just want you to know there's values associated to the two assets, okay? And so I say buy accounts receivables if they're clean. And what I would suggest is clean, or what I would argue is clean, is about 1 month's worth of collection. So if you did 1.2 to make numbers easy, 1.2 million in collections, I would want the accounts receivable balance, current 30-day, 60-day, 90, over 90, the whole thing, the total, less than 100,000, 1 month's worth of collections. So again, if it's less than that, then the front office person is really, really doing a great job. If they're much more than that, starts getting a little dirty. There's definitely some insurance claims aging. Maybe we're not collecting at the time of service. And I've seen a little bit of this with COVID, by the way, where accounts receivables are messy because people are afraid of asking their patients for money up front. So, but I will tell you that it makes a mess if you don't buy it, because if you don't buy it, you still are obligated to collect it for the seller for a period of time, okay, usually about 180 days. You have to keep asking people to pay their bills with the seller's bill. Now, you'll collect a fee off of that, totally normal, but you're still obligated to send statements and collect money. Now you got to get the front office person who already was doing probably a bad job collecting, because if you didn't buy accounts receivables, they weren't really doing a good job anyways. So now you got someone that's not very good at it, not organized, or could be organized better, managing both the ins of your money and the seller's money and keeping that all clean. So bottom line, super easy. It's way easier to buy the accounts receivables if they're healthy, so that day one of transition, the check that comes in is your check and not the seller's check. You already paid for that money. And by the way, it's an easy way to make money. I mean, it's not a lot, but last time I looked at my retirement account, I was getting, somewhere between 15 to 20% return. So that's exactly what the value of the accounts receivables is about 85% of the value. So you're instantly making 15 cents on the dollar if you buy them. So yes, the seller's taking a discount on that money, but it's just an easier transition, and that's kind of the going rate. So the benefits of working capital is that it's way more predictable. Day one, you get a chunk of change, right? And you don't have to collect money, and you can pay your bills, okay? And that's the key, is there's a cash flow situation here that you have to be prepared for as a buyer. Let me go through that scenario. When you buy accounts receivables, the day you close on the practice, and I gotta cover this, because I have buyers go into the closing table and they walk out of the closing table, and I'm literally right beside them, and they sign their life away, and it's already a very stressful situation, but then they literally have $0 in their bank account because they just use the loan money to pay the seller for accounts receivables and the practice. They have like maybe $1,000 in the account. So they're dead broke. And that's exactly how it feels. I own $1 million business, And I literally in my business account have $1,000 or sometimes no dollars. But literally the next day that you own, every check that comes in is yours. I actually had a buyer 3 months ago do this, and they're like, "Oh my God, Mike, what did you do? Why did I do this? I have no money." Freak out moment. And it was funny because we closed on a Tuesday. The practice that he just bought was closed. Like the practice was closed on Wednesday, so he didn't work, but he owned the business on Wednesday. And then Thursday was his first day as the owner, working doctor. And he came in on Thursday and he deposited $5,000 because $5,000 worth of checks came in on Wednesday, the day that he didn't even work. So then I say that then you get rich. Now, and then that's really how it feels. So just be prepared for that, buyers. Okay, if you go working capital route, completely opposite situation. Working capital, the seller gets their money. You don't buy the accounts receivables. The bank wires you 50 to 100,000 into your checking account. Brings truck, backs up, dumps it right into your checking account. You got 50, 100 grand sitting in your checking account, okay? Then what happens is over the next 45 days, you've got payroll, rent, you've got all these expenses that you got to cover over the next 45 days. And you have no money coming in on your production because it takes a minute for the insurance to pay you on the claims. So over the next 45 days, you have this freak out moment at 45 days saying, "I'm broke," right? You're collecting money for the seller and sending him or her a check, and your checking account's dwindling. And so then it rebounds, right? So then you start getting your money, but it's a very emotional process. And I can tell you that, the more you're prepared, the better. So I have to go through that. Okay, this is my emoji slide, and I'm going to power through these last two slides and flip over to the sellers. Okay, so my emoji slide is the insurance companies. That's exactly how we all feel about insurance companies. If you buy a fee-for-service practice, great. Everybody wants a fee-for-service practice. Problem with that, sellers, listen up, is it might not be great because over the years, your patients have trusted you to pay out of network fees for this long. So then as soon as the transition happens, buyers are like, "Hey, I'm pretty good. I've been out of school for 5 years. I can do just as good as he can. You can pay me." And I see a lot more attrition on practices that are fee for service. That's why I'm saying maybe not, because that trust factor. So the transition plan really has to be ironclad with that seller on fee for service. Okay, if you're the other type of the practice, that's PPO driven. So PPO driven practices, I call it the 85-15 rule, sometimes 80-20 rule. 80% of your patients are coming from insurance PPO, and then the other 20 to 15% are fee for service. Okay, this is the hardest part about a transition in my mind, because big picture here, you have to get in network, right, with the practices. You have to get network with the practices the insurance companies that the seller has. Maybe even add some, but there's got to be a strategy there. Don't just willy-nilly do it. You got to really analyze that. The problem, though, is that if you can't get in network, okay, quick enough, then you're going to be out of network in a short period of time. And credentialing sometimes takes, I'm seeing 60 days because of COVID. And so, guess what? It's going to be a challenge unless the seller's willing to potentially bill through them, which there's a lot of discussions about that and why that could be fraud and all of that. And so big picture, there's got to be a strategy here, but I put a warning sign here because if you start credentialing too soon before the practice closes, then all of those correspondence from the insurance company to you will actually get shipped off to the seller's practice. So now you got Susie open up the mail at the front office getting, "Oh, Dr. Jones? Who's Dr. Jones?" And then they go to your they go to the seller, and then the seller's like, cat's out of the bag. Some people say that telling the staff beforehand is the right way to go. I disagree 100%. There have absolutely been times that the team holds the sellers hostage and giving them a raise, or maybe there's a mass exodus. I've seen it all. And so you have to understand, as hard as it is to the team members, not telling them, sometimes them not knowing is almost protecting them, because they're going to fear the worst. They're going to fear that someone's going to come in and be a bad person, or a really rude person, or maybe a salesman, or whatever the situation. The natural brain goes to the worst case scenario. And so if the team finds out, that could be a serious problem for the buyer, for sure. Imagine trying to get a hygienist in this day and age. It's just not happening. And so I guess I would just say be careful there. The last thing I'll say is the growth strategy. Okay, guys. So growth strategy is a must. And I will tell you, these are probably the 3 easiest ways I get growth out of a practice post close. Okay. So marketing is obviously the easy one. You really got to get into marketing. You got to get aggressive to offset the attrition. Okay. SEO, social media. There's 2 types: internal, external. Internal's the most effective, but hardest to do. Blood, sweat, and tears there. External is the stuff that you pay for, and the dollar amount that you all should write down is probably somewhere between $200 to $300 to acquire a new patient through external marketing. So if you're going to do a mail campaign, it's probably going to cost you about $300 a patient. If you're going to do a pay-per-click PPC campaign, you gotta track it and see what works. Obviously patient referrals, social media, that's stuff that doesn't cost a lot of money. Reviews, that doesn't cost you money to ask for reviews. That works the best, and it's the cheapest. So marketing. Okay, hygiene department. The number one thing I see is a lack of periodontal disease diagnosing, perio charting not happening. Recare programs are not robust. You should be, every patient should have a 6-month recare. You'll be blown away at the practices that I see that just don't have that percentage of I shoot for like 90%, but the goal is about 70%. I think that's the national average, 75%, but that's the first place that I go. So looking at x-ray protocols, fluoride, getting dialed into recare, and then of course your perio program. All right, last thing, treatment planning. So I'll say treatment planning is probably the most impactful thing. Really looking at yourself and really figuring out what you feel comfortable with and how your philosophies are. But I've had too many buyers get really, really gun shy about telling patients what they need because they're worried about being the salesman. And I'm here to tell you, patients look at you as the doctor, the person with the white jacket in the room. They trust you instantly. Now, you don't have the same trust, by no means. But when you get your hygienist to help you co-diagnose, where there's already a relationship with that hygienist, you're using intraoral cameras, you're using more x-rays, you're handing off better, you have financial arrangements, you put these things in place that give patients stability to say yes to you, even though you're the newbie, okay? Really review your charts and look at what the previous doctor said. If he's been watching it for the last 6 months, guess what? The patient isn't going to be surprised when you say, hey, I know Dr. So-and-so was watching this. It's time to get it. So it's just really looking at that. But that's a big thing I see as practices kind of drop in production, is someone being overly conservative because they're worried about the trust factor. So, all right. So this is the end of the buyer's program. Let's hold all questions to the end, but take a screenshot, take a picture here. I really want you all to follow me on Instagram. Facebook. I post a lot of things. I'll probably post this up on my Facebook, but please get a hold of me, buyers that are thinking about. I'm happy to do a consult for free for Alameda County Dental Society. Like, that's my give to you tonight, is I'll give you a whole hour of just talking about your future and pointing you in the right direction, whether or not it's an opportunity for next level or not. No biggie. And then the other thing I want to highlight for buyers is I have a podcast that I just published. It's focusing today on startups. This website right here, Dental Uncensored. It's focused on startups now. It's called Startup Uncensored, but next season is going to be Acquisitions Uncensored. And so we're going to really break down acquisitions and all the pitfalls and whatnot. So for all the buyers in the room, thanks so much for hanging in there. Oh, let me try to screen share again. Not sure how that happened. Okay. Preparing to sell. I got to switch my brain. It's difficult to flip gears here, but preparing for sale is a completely different end game. So now I'm going to put my practice consulting brain hat on and think about, what I could do to help you get ready for a possible liquidation or sale or an exit strategy. So let's get into it. So my first tip is, more than any time, you got to get your team in place. And everybody always says this. Every presentation you hear from a professional is get your team in place. There is a reason why we all say that, because too many people think that it's just like selling a house and they didn't ask their accountant what the tax implication was, or they didn't talk to a dental specific attorney and talk about allocation schedules or rework clauses or all kinds of things that could get, the sellers into a situation with a buyer. And so you really do got to get your team in place. I do say brokers are definitely helpful. If you feel like you don't know how to market your practice or you're just not dialed in on that, brokers really do help. They organize it. They protect you from high maintenance buyers. The due diligence process is brutal. Imagine a buyer telling you how your practice sucks and, they want to negotiate against you to lower your price. And so that's very helpful with brokers, but then you got to write the check. So big picture, get your team in place, talk to your financial advisor, really try to get your head around what this looks like post-close, because it really is a very emotional process. I don't think any of you that haven't sold yet realize how daunting it is. I've actually paired up buyers and sellers and had the seller stay on, and the seller just constantly pulls me aside. It's like, man, this is so hard to watch my baby just be completely different than what it was when I first started. And so so big picture, it's emotional. Get a team around you. Okay, I love this slide for both buyer and seller, but it's very important for sellers because the rules of thumb are not for everybody. Be cautious about the rules of thumb. You've been to seminars, you've talked to practice brokers, they've probably told you about what your practice was worth. Be careful about generalized statements. I say two scenarios, which is better? A practice purchasing $1 million and priced at $700, or a practice producing $800 and also selling for $700. Which one's better? Obviously the $800 selling for $700 because it's more efficient, it's probably more profitable. And so be careful about generalized statements. Again, which is better? Think about the buyers now. If you were actually buying a practice, bringing in top line $1 million, but only taking home 150 grand, 85% overhead, or a practice doing 800 and making 50%, and that is possible. Seen a handful of practices making 50% profit. So obviously the 800,000 practice is worth more because of profit. Forget the percentages. People throw out percentage. Oh, you can sell your practice for 85%. Okay, yeah, that's a rule of thumb, but should the practice making 400K, only producing 800, sell for more than the practice that's only throwing off 150 but doing $1 million? Heck yes. Heck yes. This is about profit. It's not about the top line. It's about the bottom line. So I want buyers and sellers to really ingrain that, just burn that into your brains. It's about the profitability. Okay. So the mentality of the buyers. Okay. So I just kind of gave you that whole presentation on buyers and what they're thinking about. They're very cautiously optimistic though. They're optimistic, but they're cautious, especially with COVID. They're absolutely sick of associating. There are a lot of them out there, folks in this room, you can confirm this, working 2 to 3 jobs, moonlighting, trying to make it work, burning it on both sides, working 5 days, making 150 to 200 grand, and just busting their butts if they're working that hard. It's difficult, and they're sick of it, and they don't want to work for the corporates anymore. So they're just sick of it. They do want guarantees. This generation of buyers, they want some guarantees. There's no guarantees in life, buyers, by the way, but they are willing to take a chance. And so they're very educated. They're on Dental Town. The podcast pirates, I say. I have a podcast now. I started a podcast because everybody listens to podcasts. It's like, okay, maybe people will listen to me if I have a podcast. But they are very informed. When you bought, nobody was giving you advice. Everybody's giving them advice. So they're very informed, and they have some general rules of thumb that are also working against you there that they've heard from Howard Fran or whatever. But they are willing to take a risk, and they are entrepreneurs, and they're not disenchanted with dentistry. They know it's a good industry still, and it is. They do want to bargain in the current market conditions of COVID, but they are open to the numbers. And so that just be prepared for that. Everybody should be concerned about a second shutdown. I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't think we're out of the first wave. Everybody says, oh, we're out of the first wave. No, we're kind of still rebounding from the first one. So I really don't think there's going to be a second shutdown, but it's on people's minds. They obviously got to get money, relying on the banks. And so that's a really big concern. And then no, they don't have much money. They don't have a ton of cash laying around. And I already explained that they need 10%. And so you got to be realistic about these purchase prices, or you're not going to get them to the finish line. Okay. I just wanted to give everybody these statistics. What's the average practice look like? Average practice doing 500 in collections. Collected production. So collections, 67% overhead. Back to the ARs, 91% collection rate. 3 full days of hygiene per week. So at least 1 column full. 1 front office, 2 assistants, 1 hygienist. This is the average. The average owner, 64 of age, and you're getting about 10 to 15 new patients a month. If you guys want to take a screenshot, take it now. Average practice. This is what your expectations should be, buyers, of what the average practice looks like. The ideal practice, completely different conversation, but the ideal practice, I would love for my buyers to buy this practice, ideally. 65% overhead or less, grossing 25 new patients a month. Maybe not during COVID, but historically you did. 35 plus of the patients are on recall. So you're on recall, you're driving that recall program. 2,000 patients active. Listen, an active patient is someone that's been in the practice in 18 months. That's my definition for it. So it's not going to Dentrix and saying how many patients, and you see 5,000 in your list. Yeah, no, that's not your patients. The folks that have been in your practice in the last 18, fine, I'll stretch it to 24. A lot of softwares go to 24. I say 18. That's your active patient list. Of course, I want to see an upward trend. I got to do this for Zoom. An upward trend in your growth. I don't want to see anything falling. I want to see something growing or maintaining. So folks that are holding on to their practice and just kind of slowly dwindling, your asset is dying as we speak. Now, if that's your strategy, that's fine. Not saying that's bad. But just know that your valuation could be compromised if you just continue to let it go down. We're going to talk about some things that will help you grow it and get it stabilized or growing. But they want to see it grow. Remodeled in the last 7 years. Again, I said ideal practice. Last 7 years, remodeled. Seller willing to stay on for up to 1 year. I hate that, but buyers want it for a lot of reasons. I don't like that idea, but this is what the buyers are thinking that they want. 4 opportunities and room to grow. Every buyer has been on a podcast and they think they're going to do $2 million in production and by year 3, and they want to know how to get your practice that's got 4 ops to 8 ops. You know, there's always these big things for growth, and so they don't want to be pigeonholed or boxed into 4 ops. I would have an argument there that I could get your practice to 1.2 to 1.5 out of 4 ops. I've seen it, I've done it, I've helped people do it, so it's a possible thing. And then of course your staff is productive and your wages are managed. Okay, everybody take a picture of this. Ideal GP benchmarks. You know, this is like a good benchmark for you. It's 50 to 75 a month in new patients, production 20 to 25 per staff member, overhead is 63%. Facility, this is a big one, especially in California, you know, 7 to 9% of total collections, you know, percent of collections. These are all percentage of collections, by the way. Marketing, we want to see a marketing budget. I very rarely see a marketing budget in these older seller practices. We want to see one, because if you don't have one, you're not growing, you're not getting new patients. And then I've got a budget, or the buyer's got a budget, a marketing budget on top of your already expenses, which is going to, you know, be a negative mark. So start spending again in marketing and getting it. I wouldn't say ramp it up, but just get some new patients. It's going to sell easier and quicker. Supplies, lab, office, all good stuff that you all should know. Hygiene, I would like your hygiene to be a third of your practice. That's a healthy number. You know, those practices are, you know, diagnosing perio and doing all the right things. I've seen 40%. So that would be really attractive. By the way, newsflash, it's not all about the seller and you and your production. A lot of it is the hygiene department. The hygiene department is the sticky part that the buyers are buying. If patients are coming in for e-cares and that's a robust department within your practice, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, then that's going to make your practice worth more and stickier for buyers. And so the goodwill is sticky. So if you don't have a strong hygiene department, I'd be nervous for a buyer, because there's not a ton of goodwill. It's all on you, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller. And then if you go, then what goodwill am I actually buying? So think about that. There's 100 ways to boost your hygiene department. We actually have a hygiene consultant on staff that can run your practice through a very hygiene intensive program that just focuses on your department there. Okay, I promise I'm wrapping up here, folks. So big picture here, what can you do to get ready for sale? Clean, so these are kind of the top things here. Clean your books up. I just told all the buyers, it's a train wreck sometimes trying to figure out how much profit you have. You know, I recognize that you're going to have to pay a little extra tax to Uncle Sam by cleaning your books up, but do it, because buyers that don't trust your financials because you're baking in your Amazon account that your daughter is spending on through the practice, that's nervous for buyers, and rightfully so. It should be. So clean it up. I know you're going to pay the extra taxes, but trust me, it brings stability to the sale. It'd be like selling your house and the buyer walks in and they just see some cut cornered, you know, drywall patch job, and they're probably going to look at it and be like, is this how the whole house is? So you lose the credibility from the buyer. Manage your expenses in general through this COVID. That's been a challenge. Of course, there's a lot of conversation on the EIDL loan and the PPP loan and how that affects transitions. EIDL loans have to be paid back. PPP loans don't. So if that's a question that you all have, let's have a conversation about it. If your books aren't clean, start documenting all of your one-time expenses in your practice. So like, for example, if you bought a cone beam, that's going to drive your expenses up, and it's going to show less profitability. But if you added that expense back, it would be profitability. So calling out those major one-time investment expenses to the buyer, to do that today, start documenting big things like, oh, paid my husband $20,000 bonus. He doesn't even work in the practice, but that, put that in a spreadsheet so you can hand that to the buyer and say, hey, these are all the expenses that aren't real expenses for you post-close. That's going to help you in your evaluation. Okay. Set production goals. I say that because it's not because I want you to just crush it and I don't want you to if you've averaged 550 every year and then in 2021 you do $1 million or 700, that big spike is a little nerve-wracking for buyers and people like myself too. So it's not that'd be great, good for you if you do that. You're definitely going to be able to sell your practice for more, but just get it stable and back into what your production numbers should be on a month-day basis, so that you can end the year at the number that you want, so that it's consistent and not dying. Fill the hygiene schedule, secure key team members. Get your practice HIPAA compliant. In 2020, Windows 10 apparently cannot handle HIPAA. It's not HIPAA compliant. So if you're still on Windows 10, a good buyer or someone that's advocating for a buyer will probably have you lower your price slightly so that you can get your practice HIPAA, because a HIPAA fine is just huge to buyers and owners moving forward. If you're not HIPAA compliant, it should be something that you're concerned about. And unfortunately, Windows 10 is not compliant. Clean up your accounts receivables. You heard that in the last presentation. And then here's one. Clean up your credits today. You've got credits to patients. You're gonna have to credit this buyer on those credits. The buyers are not gonna want to pay for those credits. And so start cleaning them up now. I've seen $20,000 worth of credits that sellers have to clean up or pay for at the day of closing. That's not a fun report for you all to pull. So yeah, clean up your credits. Okay. How am I doing, Sean? I think we're okay.
We're doing pretty good. We do have some questions rolling in. So maybe about 5-10 more minutes or so, then we'll open it up for questions.
Let's do it. So I think this is my second to last slide or last slide. So things that, for sellers, things you can control versus the things you can't control. I want to call this out. You can't control the insurance company's fees. You can't control the market's wage expectations. Hygienists are getting way more than they ever have. You can't control your rent. It's already fixed. So you can't control that. If it's something you can't control, don't worry about it. So COVID, you couldn't control that. The things that you can control: patient experience, culture in your practice, culture with your patients, new patients, follow-ups, case presentation, your own personal spending, fee schedules. When was the last time you negotiated your fees? Production goals. These are all things that you can control that grow the practice, things that I focus on as a consultant. And just putting a little energy towards any number of these things can really grow your practice and put some stability in. So all those things that we talked about tonight, put a game plan in place for each one of these things so that your practice can sell more, in a year or 2 years later down the road. We actually do, Next Level Consultants have an exit strategy program that if you wanted to commit for a year and grow your practice, we can help you do that. And then obviously we're happy to transition what we've done to the buyer, and so that they can continue that success. And so, and these are those things. This next slide is I want you to take a picture, sellers, of this, and take this quiz that I've put together. Like, be real with yourself. Do you know any of these? And if you don't, you're probably not paying attention to your business. Just focusing on some of these things can really grow your practice, and get it a lot more stable. It doesn't have to be about getting brand new equipment and refreshing so that it's some beautiful office. Like, buyers want stability. They want a good business to buy, and they can, do remodels. They can buy new equipment and reinvest into CAD CAM and cone beams and all the cool things that are happening in the world today. But if you focus on some of this basic stuff here, it's going to be a very attractive practice, and you're going to sell for more. That's the bottom line. Buyers will be willing to buy for more. So again, I'm going to stop there. Sean's going to yell at me if I don't, but again, please take a picture. I want you to follow me. I want you to follow me on Facebook, Instagram. That's my way of giving back to the community, because if you guys are asking me questions or learning things, and that's my way of giving back to you all. The dental industry has been so good to me in my career that's my way of giving back. I love what I do, super passionate about it, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. Sean, do you want to run the Q&A? I appreciate y'all letting me be on today. I really am.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a few submissions through the Q&A and the chat sections. So let's start with a couple buyer questions. I think this one, Michael, goes back to your finance slide for buyers. Are the banks still evaluating cash liquidity on a scale depending on how far out of school you are? For example, someone 1 year out of school wouldn't be expected to have as much cash as someone 10 years out.
Yeah, great question. Someone definitely has talked to the banks. That's back in the day before COVID. They would look at your personal expenses, and they would look at your income, and then they would say, oh, this guy's made 100 grand, but his bills are only 30 grand a year. And so they should have a bigger checking account. They want to see if you're a spender or a saver. And they used to do that like comparison. Today with COVID, they're drawing a hard line at 10%. And so they don't really care. The banks don't want to get into a situation where you're dealing with a soft COVID market and you're stuck with no cash, and then there's a default situation. So unfortunately, they're being a lot more bullish in that 10% liquidity. Maybe we go back to what you just described, whoever asked that question, great job. Maybe they go back to looking at the scenario and leaning into it. But today they're being very, no, you need 10%, get a gift or go find a smaller practice.
Okay. Next question, also on the buyer side. If the dental office staff already knows about a possible transition or a sale, should the buyer at that point credential with Delta Dental before completion of the sale?
Well, specifically about Delta, the answer is don't sweat Delta. The one good thing about Delta is they're quick to pay and they're quick to credential. So it's usually not my dental insurances and I work in all states. I can't cite specifically about California, but by and large, Delta can get your credentialing going quickly and get you flipped. But in that scenario, it's the other insurance companies that take sometimes 90 days. In that scenario with that question, if the staff knows, heck yeah, get the credentialing going like today, like right now. Otherwise, yeah, you could walk into an ownership situation where you're having to tell a patient, hey, Mr. Patient, we're in a transition right now. Right now we're out of network. Yesterday you were in network with Dr. Jones, but I just bought it. And so would you mind paying more? They're not going to pay. So then you're going to have to write it off, and there's bigger write-offs there for that period of time while you're waiting for the credentialing.
Okay. Then we had a couple questions from sellers that came in by email. This is a two-part question, and you might have touched already on some of this, but what are the top 3 mistakes sellers make so that the buyer and bank want to walk away from the transaction? And then how many years before a practice sale should a seller start prepping a firm to look its best to a buyer?
Repeat the first one because I think I got it. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. What are the top 3 mistakes sellers make so that the buyer and bank want to walk away from the transaction?
Perfect. Okay. I'll answer the second question first because it's a quick and dirty answer. I would say, if it was me, I would want a year to 2 years of prep because you could clean your books up in a year's period of time. You also could take a run at maybe 10 or 15% growth, very conservative growth. And that literally is going to net you more money at your sale. So just like any investment, why wouldn't you want to put a little effort in to grow your investment? You've spent your whole life doing it. And your patients are going to be more receptive to some of those growth things because, they trust you and they like you. So 1 to 2 years is probably the answer there. Top 3 things, that's a good one. Gosh, that's a tough one for me because there's so many things that blow deals. I would say the lease absolutely will blow a deal. Banks hate bad leases. If you don't approach your landlord today and say, hey, I'm thinking about selling the next 2 to 3 years. I just want to let you know, play ball with my buyer. Let's maybe renegotiate your lease for another 10 years. I can refer you to some great real estate people in your area that can look at it and evaluate. So the lease is probably the number 1 thing that I see blows deals. Number 2, I already touched on it a few times. When you've got personal expenses baked in so badly into your profit and loss, the bank gets really, really scared about that stuff. It kind of just tells that your integrity is a little questionable because if you're trying to hide and evade, I'll use the word evade taxes. I've seen some crazy things. Banks are like, whoa, like, I don't know if I trust this deal, right? And so you really got to clean up your books. That's something that the banks really, really do not like. And then I would say the third thing from a seller's perspective is if you're trending down hard, that probably disqualifies the top 3 dental lending firms in the country. They hate the trend down. If you're stable, all of them are in the game. If you're growing, all of them are in the game. But if you're trending down, B of A, Wells, Lendeavor, I could go on and on. The big boys are like, whoa, like, why is this practice plummeting? And why would a buyer come in and be the savior if you've owned it for 20 years and you're taking it down, right? And so that's probably the biggest thing. I'll throw a couple more in there. Buyers not having liquidity, that's a deal killer today. Maybe there's a seller carryback situation there. I would say be open to seller carrybacks, but they're not necessarily required. What is a seller carryback? I'll touch that because I get that question a lot. That's when the bank finances what they're willing to finance. So say your practice is doing $1 million and your practice broker put you at 800 as your value, but the bank thinks it's worth 500. So now we're 300,000 deficient. If you still want your 800 purchase price and the bank's only willing to give you 5, you, Mr. Seller, will have to carry the note for the other 3. Otherwise, it kills the deal. So in some situations, you might be open to a carryback. So non-competes, deal killer if you're not willing to be open to that. COVID, if you're 50% of last year's number, forget it. You got to rebound. I've had a couple practices that sellers are just like, I'm done, forget this. I'm selling my practice. And then the bank comes in and is like, okay, everybody else has rebounded 80 to 90% of where they were. You're at 50%. You just walked away from this thing. They know that. So I would say those are probably some pretty big hot buttons.
Great. Next question, another 2-part question. What percentage of practices are going corporate? And then what are the similarities and differences between a corporate sale and a private sale?
That's a good question. Is this a seller or a buyer asking?
Looks like it came from a seller.
I ask because sellers' mentality about selling to corporate or not is an interesting topic right now. So I don't have a statistic on at what rate or at what percentage are sellers selling to corporate. The reason that question is being asked is because it is a hot topic. In some states like Arizona, corporate dentistry is just gangbusters because the laws aren't as stringent as like maybe a Washington state where I live, very, very stringent. And so in those states, there's going to be a different rate of corporate buyers than there would be in Washington. So that's going to be a tough one for me to give you an answer. Now, I will tell you, yes, it's on the rise, but I do maybe anywhere from 20 to 50 transitions a year. And that's the private sale world. And private sales, doctor to doctor, are thriving. Tons of private owners. I still think we're eons out from corporate dentistry taking over, just based on what I've seen and experienced. But yeah, it's definitely happening. So I don't have a growth rate there, but I can tell you that private purchases dwarf corporate, but there's definitely corporate gobbling up certain types of practices. As far as a sales perspective, completely different scenario. So you're probably hearing some evaluations where you've heard the term 7 to 10 times EBITDA, which is EBITDA is another word for profit. 7 to 10 times profit in 1 year. It's a multiple. And the reality is that's a different calculation than what you're used to. So like a corporate office will look at your practice, Mr. Seller, and assume that they're going to have to put an associate in there for what you produce. So if you throw in like a 35 or 32% associate percentage contract into a dental office, your profit is probably closer to 8 to 15% because you got to pay the associate their production. So it's 7 to 10 times that 15% if your practice is that profitable. So you and me probably need to get in a room and talk for another hour about this conversation. But basically what I'm trying to say is yes, you could sell your practice for more for corporate. Yes. The calculation is completely different. It's not a percentage of. And oftentimes the corporates are asking you to stay on for a period of time because that's just their game plan, like Heartland. They'll give you a discounted price, but an earn out and make you stay longer. So there's pros and cons for you, Mr. Seller and Mrs. Seller, but I'm going to tell everybody on the call, I'm so pro private practice transitions. I'm so against DSO corporate. I would rather you sell to a person that's going to take your practice over and take great, care of your patients and your community. But I do recognize that money talks. And so, we can have that conversation.
This next question came in 2 parts, so I hope I'm asking this correctly, but it's on HIPAA. And if not Windows 10, then what to use?
Well, you just need to get it better than Windows 10 or newer than Windows 10. So Dentrix, EagleSoft, all of those, Open Dental, they all can run off of Windows 10. But the big thing in 2020 was that HIPAA. I'm not an IT guy, so you got to consult an IT professional to get the nerdy answer here. But the answer is Windows 10 cannot be HIPAA compliant with HIPAA's rules today in 2020. So you just need to get a newer, upgraded version of Windows. And if a buyer doesn't know that, well, then maybe you don't need to upgrade. But don't be surprised. And then an IT guy or gal is going to come in and quote a whole new server, and that could be a $20,000 to $30,000 concession on price just to get you going on a server that's HIPAA compliant. So just be prepared for that.
Next question. Is it considered fraud to bill under a seller's name during the first year?
All right, I was waiting for this question. So This is kind of putting me on the spot. All the attorneys will say yes. If you straight up called the insurance company right now and said, is this fraud? By black and white, it is. In all the years that I've been doing this, not one lawsuit, not one. And the seller's got to be comfortable with it. And a lot of sellers aren't, because their attorneys will say, don't do it, because on print, it is fraud. And so this is a hot topic, you guys, so don't beat me up for it. But I'm telling you right now, if buyers submitted a claim and put a cover letter on that claim and said, hey, we're going through a transition, I'm not credentialed yet, please bill this through them in the next 60 to 90 days. We will be credentialed. Our application is in your company's hands. So please, they will process it. I promise. And the worst thing they could do is deny it, but you're telling them when you submit it. So if you call Delta Dental up right now and said, this is what I'm going to do, am I going to get in trouble? On the phone, they will tell you you'll be fine. On print, on the website, what the attorneys are saying, they're all warning everybody it's fraud. Don't be sneaky about it. Just do it the right way and they'll be cool with it. There is a transition period that they're willing to work with you on. But again, the seller's got to play ball there, and a lot of sellers are just not willing to play ball. So, I'll add a caveat to that. If the seller stays on, it's almost a non-issue at all. It's not fraud. So like if the seller stays in the practice and they're still a provider in that practice for 30, 60 days during the transition, if the seller's in, it straight up says that it's not fraud. So that kind of takes it all out of legal's hands in that case. So
this next question is from the buyer's perspective, and I'm going to try and merge these questions in together because it's kind of a three-part question. Would you recommend a buyer renegotiate a lease if it hasn't been done so at the time of the transition? Would you recommend changing the locations? And if you do change locations, what's a reasonable distance you would expect to be able to move without losing a significant number of patients?
Great question. So I would heavily suggest not to relocate, all while taking over a transition. But what you don't know, or maybe you do know and you own the practice today, your hair's on fire and you got 100 things going on. You're trying to win the patients over. You're trying to get the confidence of the team. You're trying to deal with insurance. You're trying to market. I mean, you got 1,000 things going on. And then you're going to deal with a relo, like that would be hell. And then you got to tell your patients, hey, meet me over here. I'm the new guy, but we're at a different location. Like it's a little messy. So I would never suggest relocating unless you had to. To answer the first question, you should look at the lease. If you can assign it and you still have 10 years, it's probably fine. As long as you have 10 years available to you, that's the key. You have 10 years available. I would always suggest looking at the lease, and if the lease terms are outrageous, approach the landlord before the close and try to renegotiate a brand new lease. That's going to take a lot longer, by the way, and sometimes that kills deals. If the landlord doesn't play ball, it's a very sensitive topic. If you can assign it, if the terms are decent, and consult with your attorney on this, if the terms are decent, just assign it and secure yourself 10 years. But if there's clauses in there like demo clauses and all kinds of weird stuff that your attorney really doesn't like, then try to get a new lease and go after it. I hope I answered that question. Please ask a part 2 to that question if I didn't. There's another, that was a third question in there. How far can you relocate? If you had to relocate, that depends on rural versus urban. If you're urban, I would say less than a quarter of a mile, to be honest with you, a couple blocks. If it's very urban, but the general rule is, a mile to 2 miles urban. Rural, I would say you probably could get away with maybe 5 miles, but you just got to use your common sense here. Your patients are coming to your practice. they got to drive 30 minutes to get to you. They're probably going to find someone in between that drive. You don't want them looking at other practices as they're trying to find you, right? And so that's a real thing. So I guess what I'd say is you got to take the oh, and the other thing is, you know, the X factor there is barriers. There's sometimes barriers like a mountain or a highway. Sometimes people don't want to go over the highway. Sometimes it might be quicker to go over the highway, but people just kind of say, you know, I don't want to go over to Tacoma. I'll go, you know, 5 miles too far the other way, just because that's on the other side of the highway. So you got to pay attention to some of those barriers if you're going to relocate your practice. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
Next question. Do you recommend solo practices to become incorporated?
Solo versus sole props and going LLC. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to practices going LLC or S corps. So yeah, consult an accountant about that one. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney, but yes, I would highly suggest you do that. Soon, yes, the answer is yes. But consult with a CPA.
The next question, which it looks like it right now is the last question on the list, similar to the previous question. Currently, I am an associate and just a W-2 employee. If I'm planning to become an owner, hopefully soon, when would be a good time to establish an S corp?
Okay, I thought that was the question before. I thought that was a seller question. So if you're an associate, if that's what the meaning of that last question was, similar.
Sorry, yes, it was 2 different questions. I think the first one came from a current owner, and this one's coming from a potential buyer.
Okay, sorry, I'm toggling both buyers and sellers right now. Sean, ask that question one more time from the associate's perspective.
From the buyer's perspective. Currently, I'm an associate and just a W-2 employee. If I'm planning to become an owner, hopefully soon, when would be a good time to establish an S corp?
Yeah, no, you don't need to go. You don't. In fact, you shouldn't do an S corp right out of the gate. If you're contracted right now with an associate position and I would do that sooner than later, but you're going to end up probably filing another entity when you buy the practice. So don't feel like you're in a big rush there. If you're W-2, stay W-2. There's no big deal there. What probably is going to happen is you know, you'll look at a prospectus, you'll review it, you'll submit your LOI, it'll get accepted. You'll go through all the due diligence, and then if you want to buy the practice, you got 30 days to close. That's when you need to set up your entity. You need the entity for when you get your loan documents and the lease. That's when you need your entity, and that's literally at the finish line. You can usually file and get an EIN and all of that business license type stuff. You can get that probably in less than I know you can get it in less than 5 days. So don't feel rushed to do that at all.
Great.
Is that it? Really?
That is the last question. That's almost perfect timing, 5 minutes before 8 p.m. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight, and a big thank you to Michael for coming out. For the attendees on the line too, look for an email tomorrow morning for the session evaluation. And included in that, as Michael mentioned, he is offering a free consultation to ACDS members. So if you'd like to schedule a follow-up call with Michael, please respond to that email, and he'll get in touch with you. But otherwise, thank you again, Michael, and I hope to see everybody again in person soon at some general meetings. And everyone have a good evening.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Michael.